Hey there, Nick Hackers here. In this video, we're going to go over a couple of pull requests that I recently added to Flask-Debugtoolbar, Flask-WTF, and Flask-Login that's all related to deprecation warnings introduced by updating an application to use Flask 2.0. So the Palettes team over here, they released Flask 2.0 back in May 11th, 2021, and with that came with a couple of other updates for Werkzeug, Jinja, Click, It's Dangerous, and a couple of other libraries that you might use when you're using Flask. And congratulations first off on the team for that one, but if you did update an application and you happen to be using Flask-Login, WTF, and Debugtoolbar, then chances are you are going to see these deprecation warnings. Now, these warnings are due to code in those specific libraries, so it's not like an application change that you can make. And honestly, by the time you watch this video, these might go away because I did open pull requests for all these libraries to fix these, so if they get merged into a new release, then you won't get them anymore. But in this video, I figured, maybe there's a nice takeaway there on how to go about committing to a brand new code base that you've never even looked at the source code, maybe reading some warnings in the terminal and like figuring out the workflow of how you can go about to create a new PR to address situations like this. And that's what we're going to focus on in this video. Although we're not going to be doing it like live from scratch, like I've already made the PR, so we're kind of going to go over stuff that already existed. So yeah, in the build setup of Flask course, I did update things to Flask 2.0. I've got, over 100 tests, and these were the deprecation warnings I saw. So, first of all, I guess technically like one way to go about this would just be to ignore it, right? Because these deprecation warnings, they say, for example, this one, it's going to be removed in Jinja 3.1. And this is specific to Flask-Debugtoolbar. It doesn't really say that, but that's another thing we're going to tackle in this video. But yeah, we could just choose to ignore this, hopefully wait until the maintainer fixes it or someone else reports an issue. But, I've been using Flask for I don't know how many years now, right? Since like 2014 or whatever. And it's a really good web framework in my opinion. I really like working with Python, really like Flask, really like the community behind it. And, I've been using libraries like Flask-Debugtoolbar, the Login and WTF ones for basically all of that time, right? And, it kind of feels like to be a jerk to not do anything about seeing these warnings. Like, why put the burden on the maintainer to deal with this? Like, why not just go and take the proactive approach and, open a PR to fix something? And, by the time you watch this video, like the PRs are already open for these specific issues. But, in the future, maybe you'll see another deprecation warning for something else or, possibly a way to improve documentation or something like that. So if you see those opportunities and you want to contribute to code bases, like that's a really great way to get into that because, you don't need to be like a super crazy professional, like whatever. Like I've never looked at these code bases before. I just read the warnings and kind of went in there and made like very, very minor changes. Like most of these were just like 1 or 2 line change. For Flask-Debugtoolbar, it was a little bit more interesting and we'll get into that one. But yeah, the takeaway there is don't be afraid to open a PR to, address an issue or a bug or documentation or whatever issues in an open source project, because you never know. Like, I don't think I ever made a video about this one, and I'm not trying to like flex on you guys in this video here, but a while back, I got this badge here from GitHub that says that I'm a, helicopter contributor because there was a helicopter mission to Mars not too long ago. And I happened to contribute to the Flask code base back in like 2015. And all I did there was I just changed around some documentation. I think it was like 5 lines or a couple, like basically like 1 sentence in the documentation. And suddenly I get this cool badge. And, that can happen to you as well, right? Of course, it's not going to be related to the helicopter mission where they actually remote control the helicopter on Mars. But, who knows about this stuff, right? And, it's kind of nice just to contribute to something that you've been using for a long time. At least for things like that, it like makes me feel good on the inside. So let's just begin by going over some of these warnings, how I approached solving them, and going over the PRs themselves. So I actually want to start with the Flask-Login one here on the bottom first, because it says, hey, by the way, a deprecation warning, this string or safe string compare is deprecated and it's going to be removed in Werkzeug 2.1. Instead, just use hmac.compareDigest instead. HMAC happens to be a built-in Python module, but I mean, just reading this deprecation warning, it's very, very super descriptive, right? It says, okay, this is related to Flask-Login, specifically in utils.py line 63. Here is the warning. You're using this function here, but this is deprecated. It's going to be removed in the next version of Werkzeug, whatever, like 2.1. And instead, just use this. Like, you can't even ask for much better. And it shows you exactly where the thing is being used. Like, this is such a beautifully written message that it solves itself almost, right? Like if there was an AI to be like created, right? Like an AI can look at that and just parse this message and basically open the PR itself. Like it's that descriptive. And that's basically what I did, right? So I went into Flask-Login's code base. I went to the utils.py file. I went to line 63. Yep, okay, cool. We're using this from Werkzeug. So I just changed it to be HMAC instead. But before we get there, I think there is another takeaway here as well. So for example, at the very start of this adventure of like, I decided like, okay, I'm going to handle all of these deprecation warnings and just open PRs and do everything. Let's see what happens. It didn't really start with me thinking that immediately. So like the first thing I did was I went to Flask-Login because I happened to just be working with that one initially. So I opened up an issue here, which happens to be open at the time of right now. And I'm like, hey, by the way, updated to Flask 2.0, Werkzeug, blah, blah, blah. There's this new deprecation warning coming up. So I described the issue, I gave reproducible steps, I wrote down the issue here, basically the warning that we just went over, and expected behavior, no warnings. So that was very quickly tagged here as contributor friendly. Max over here, he's the owner of the library, says should be pretty straightforward to fix. And then I thought like, okay, cool. Like maybe I should just open a PR if it's like, contributor friendly, straightforward. That's right up my alley, right? Like it's not going to take me 100 years to do it. I don't need like super crazy knowledge of the code base. And we have the really informative deprecation warning. So yeah, cool. He says, no problem. Let me do it up. So then I'm like, cool, I did it up. And here is the PR. And if I take a look at this pull request here, all I did was make that one change that the deprecation warning said to do. So, here is utils line 63. And I just removed this safe string compare function that was being imported from Werkzeug security. So I removed the import as well because it's being deprecated. We're not going to be using it anymore. And instead, I just replaced that to use hmac.compareDigest. So fortunately, the call signature of the function itself, we can see is the same in both cases. So compareDigest does the same thing as safe string compare. So all I had to do was just call hmac.compareDigest, just like the warning said, and that was it. So I actually didn't even have to import hmac because normally you would have to, but it just so happens in this utils.py file up at the top, they already had that imported. So, I'm skipping over some super basics about pull requests, right? Like the first thing I did was like I forked the repo, I cloned it down on my machine, I made the edits there, pushed it up, opened the PR. Like that's the mechanics of that. Maybe I'll do another video about that specifically, but for this specific PR, that's all that took to get it to work. And it looks like, CI failed immediately when I pushed that, which made me disappointed because, and actually if I go back to here, it's always fun, right? It's like, okay, cool, I opened up the PR. I didn't run the test suite locally. Let's see how straightforward this is. Because when people say like, oh yeah, it's straightforward, no problem, contributor friendly, before you know it, you're like 17 hours into it. But in this case, fortunately, or unfortunately, I guess, like it didn't immediately get merged because it's blocking here. But this block is due to, I guess, Flask-Login recently moved to using GitHub Actions. So basically like their CI setup is busted. And if you look at all other pull requests recently that were added, you can see X, even automated ones as well, like their CI is just broken. So eventually that's going to be fixed. I hope this gets merged in. Eventually it will be in a new release of Flask-Login. And then maybe by the time you even watch this video, this deprecation warning just won't exist anymore because it's going to be addressed. So now let's go over another one here, which is for Flask-WTF. This is a really nice library for dealing with forms, by the way. So this deprecation warning, it says Jinja2.markup is deprecated, and it's going to be removed in Jinja 3.1. Instead, just import markup safe.markup instead. And actually, if we go back to the web page here, we can see that markup safe is part of the palettes toolset, basically, popular libraries that folks will use at Flask or, things like that. So going back to the warning here, yeah, this one also says that, hey, by the way, it's in form.py, line 133. So I went through the process, forked Flask-WTF, opened it up in my code editor, made the branch, opened the PR, blah, 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 blah. I commit the change, of course, first, but, let's go and check out that PR now. And also, let me start getting rid of things that we've already talked about, right? Like this is the Flask-WTF one. This is me talking about helicopters, and that's the PR specifically. Yes, it's this one, okay? So, this time around when it came to Flask-WTF, I didn't even bother opening the issue, right? It's like, why even bother opening the issue? Let's just go straight to the PR. And because it's not like I'm going to open the issue and they're going to be like, you know what? Let's actually just keep it in there so it becomes deprecated and then we can't use the library anymore. No, of course, like someone's going to do the work to put in the PR. So instead of taking the time of doing the issue, just do the PR. And, the PR basically explains the situation. Hey, I updated to Flask 2.0, starting to get this warning. This PR takes the advice of the thing, blah, 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 blah. Funny enough, CI is also broken here related to Jinja 3. It looks like that may be fixed at some point in the future. I can't do anything about this failing right now, but what I ended up doing was super basic simple, right? And in fact, we just go back to the terminal here. It just says Jinja.markup is deprecated. Go ahead and just use markup safe.markup instead. And here's the line, and here's like whatever, the line that was being called. So all I did was I just imported markup now from markup safe instead of Jinja 2, just like the deprecation warning message told us, and that was it. literally like the most simple change you can ever ask for. But, if this gets merged in, then it's like suddenly I'm a contributor to Flask-WTF. Like, I don't care if I'm like, oh, look at me, I'm contributing to open source, but yeah, it makes me feel good on the inside. And, I'm happy to give back to this library because I've used it in basically every Flask project I ever wrote for the last like 7 years or something like that. So now let's go over the next one. Now, the next one is pretty interesting because this one just says, in Jinja 2 environment, deprecation warning, the with extension is deprecated and will be removed in Jinja 3.1. This is built in now, like it's just built into Jinja 3, and it gives us a line reference there. And if we follow the patterns that we've been doing before, like for example, this is clearly specific to Flask-WTF, this one for Flask-Login, but this one looks like it's clearly related to Jinja 2 here, right? And the deprecation warning says the with extension has been deprecated and it's going to be removed from Jinja 3.1, and it's already built in right now. So this starts to get pretty interesting because, yeah, you would think by reading this, like there's something wrong with the Jinja 2 library itself. Now, that kind of made me feel a little bit weird reading that because it's like, why would the Jinja 2 library have a deprecation warning about something being removed from itself, right? But, just using the same patterns as before, let me see, I'm going to have to actually go into a new browser tab here and do a search for Flask. What am I searching for? I am doing a search for Jinja, actually. All right, gonna have to blur my history. Cool. So this one, what I ended up doing was I just opened an issue on this one because I really wasn't 100% on where to go with this one. Like, what do I solve exactly? So, I just said, by the way, using Python 3.95, Jinja 3, they had some like boilerplate on how to open an issue, gave the situation out here, and this is where we're at. And then one of the members of this was like, by the way, this is blah, 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 blah. You just need to literally remove the extension from your application. But, I don't actually have this thing used in my specific application, right? So if I go back here to the code base, like the application we build in the course, like I'm totally not just pulling in this extension from Jinja anywhere in my code base. So yeah, I asked him about that, like what needs to be done on my end, because like I'm actually not using that anywhere in the code base. And then, he pops in here, Mr. Raccoon or Mrs. Raccoon or whatever the heck that thing is. They're like, did you do this in your code base? So I'm like, no, definitely don't have any of that in my code base. But, now that I have something to search for specifically, I decided like, okay, maybe there's an extension I'm using that has this reference in there somewhere. So what I ended up doing then was I just grepped through the site packages directory in the container because right now, this application is running in Docker. So I just went to the site packages directory inside the container, grepped through all that, and then, well, I say grep through all that, like I just grepped this recursively in site packages, and I found this hit here for Flask-Debugtoolbar that says, hey, you know what, that's being referenced right here, and I even linked to it there. So, then this issue kind of turned into like, maybe this deprecation warning could be a little bit more specific to like what is actually the problem, right? Because we go back to this warning here, there's like no reference to Flask-Debugtoolbar, right? It looks like it's an issue with Jinja from my point of view, from like an outsider of just using the library. So yeah, that got closed and then reopened, and then David figured out a way to solve it. Basically, he created another PR for Jinja itself to improve the warning that says now it just goes basically one level up or whatever in the stack trace so that we actually get the correct information. So this is kind of neat because now indirectly just solving this deprecation warning, now I improve the Jinja library to make it more descriptive if future problems exist when it comes to, Jinja deprecations. But, what this really led to in the end now is like, well, Flask-Debugtoolbar needs to be fixed. And this one was a little bit more interesting of a PR. It wasn't just like fixing, in import. I had to come up with like a total strategy for like, how do we do this? Because here's the situation, right? So we're getting this issue with Flask-Debugtoolbar. It has a reference to using that with extension with Jinja, but Flask 2.0 and Jinja 3 like just came out. It's like May 14th. I'm making this video right now. Not everyone is going to jump on that right away. So Flask-Debugtoolbar has been around forever. It works really well. It's an amazing extension for seeing like debug information about your Flask app. But there might be folks using Flask 1.12 or whatever, and an older version of Jinja. So like basically we need to make a PR where this works with both, and we don't get the deprecation warning. So what I ended up doing here was creating a PR to address that here. And, I basically just opened up a PR saying, remove with extension for Jinja 3 and gave at least what I think is a very descriptive git commit message. And, here is the code to deal with this situation. So let's first look at the code itself because, we didn't get hints on where to go in the code from deprecation warning. Like I basically just had to go in there and kind of figure out like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, we got this hint here, but, I found exactly where it needed to go from the grep result, no problem. But here's the situation, right? So Flask-Debugtoolbar is enabling these two Jinja extensions here on the left. There's one for I18 there, like internationalization, and there's this other with one that's now been deprecated in Jinja 3. So here is basically, the interesting part, the dilemma, the thing that we need to solve. How do we make this work with both Jinja 2 and 3? And on the right, I kind of figured like, okay, so this basically list of strings needs to change based on whether or not we're using Jinja 2 or Jinja 3. So the first step, or the first thing that I thought of immediately was like, okay, this list now needs to become a variable. So let's make a new variable called Jinja extensions. And for now, let's just put in what we know needs to exist in both, which is the I18 one. And then now, like, I started thinking in my mind, like, okay, so how can we detect if we're using Jinja 2 or version 3? Like, I don't know. I had no idea, right? So I just started Googling like how to get Jinja version. And it turns out that in Jinja itself, you can import _ version. And I believe Flask has the same format too. Like you can just import _ version. So I'm like, okay, great. That's going to give us the version. And, just to be super clear on what we're doing in the PR, let me just rename this import to be Jinja version so it's not confusing, like it's not Flask or whatever. In fact, I can actually, let's maybe pop open a terminal here. And I have this container already running in the background. So let me just go to a Python prompt here, and I can do import Jinja 2. What am I doing from Jinja 2? No, I want to do from Jinja 2 import _ version as, well, we don't need to do the as, right? We can just keep it here. Oh, it's Jinja 2. What am I doing? There we go. So now that we have access to this version here, we can just take a look here at the version. And what do we get back? We get back 3.00 because 3.00 is in my requirements.txt. That's the version that's installed. So this is exactly what I did in the PR, by the way. Like I tried it out and I'm like, okay, cool. We get back 3.00 as a string. So safe to say, if I was using something like 2.50 or something like that, it's going to say 2.50. And then I went into my code editor and started messing around there and, playing around with some strategies here in the interpreter. And this is what I came up with here, right? So we have the Jinja version. Let's just get the first character of that and see if it's equal to 2 as a string because it's coming back as a string. And then, okay, cool, it's 2. So let's take this list that we have here and just append a new item to it, which is the with extension. So basically, if we're using Jinja 2, this with extension is going to be applied. If you happen to be using Jinja 3, this if condition is not going to fire because, this is going to evaluate to false. Nothing happens. We just have I18 there, and then it gets set here as the environment, as a list of extensions, and it's all good. And it's going to work in both versions. Now, I actually didn't test this locally because, I don't have like a non-containerized environment to test it out, but I'm very confident that this will work, and they're going to let me know if it doesn't work. And it looks like this one actually ended up passing the CI test. Again, like I don't really know if they're running that many CI tests. Probably not. Looks like maybe nothing, but it's all here ready to go for them. At their convenience, they can look at it and merge it in. So yeah, I mean, that is going to be basically a 20-minute video of how I went about making changes to a couple of popular libraries I use without really being an expert in any of those libraries, right? Like I've never once looked at the code base. I just looked at the deprecation warnings. And yeah, I hope the takeaway there is like, just don't be afraid to commit to other people's code bases if you happen to see something, because yeah, sometimes just a one-liner, it's still like a lot of value to that. Like maintainers will be very happy. So, when people open PRs to my stuff, it's like, I don't want to say like it makes my day like the best day ever, but it really does. Like it's like, wow, someone's actually using this and, they like it enough to contribute to it. Like, so if you want to make a maintainer feel welcome and you want to thank them, just do stuff like that and you will be in very good shape. With that said, let me know in the comments below if you've ever contributed to an open source code base. We can also link to the ones that you did and like what you did there. Maybe we can have a chat about that. With that said, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it helps a lot. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next one.